Mute myself. So good morning again, everyone. My name is Mark Cormier, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English Costa Rica, I want to welcome you to the first interactive webinar of day 2 of our 2021 online conference, Building a Community of Practice to Enhance and Transcend English Language Teaching and Learning. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for the day. Brian Mulligan is the head of online learning innovation in the Institute of Technology Sligo in Ireland. He is an engineer whose early career was in simulation and the application of information technology in engineering. Since the mid-90s, he has been a key innovator in the application of IT in teaching in Ireland, most notably initiating online distance learning from the Institute in 2002 and growing it to over 4,800 students, making it Ireland's largest provider of online education and a world leader in online education in engineering and manufacturing. He's currently working on developing self-directed learning, work-based and project-based degrees. So here to speak with us today with this presentation, Exploring Barriers to Innovation in Education, please welcome Brian Mulligan.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen now. I can. You can all hear me okay?
Yes,
just checking before. So, okay. Well, firstly, let me say it's a privilege to be asked to speak to you. And I have to say that when I was asked to speak to you, I felt very uncertain because I wasn't sure to what extent what we would have in common. And I presume it is about innovating and using technology in education is the reason I've been asked. I have been experimenting with technology actually right back to the 80s. I graduated in 1978. I'm due to retire next year. I spent most of that, I'm 37 years in education, and a lot of time experimenting casually with the use of technology in teaching, and more recently, more formally being not only experimenting, but helping others to work as well. Now, it hasn't all been plain sailing. You get a lot of ideas when you're innovating, and you get quite frustrated when you come across reasons why you can't get them to work. There are barriers in the system. So when I was asked to talk to you, I thought, well, what interests me at the moment? And the one thing that does interest me at the moment are we've lots of good ideas, but we keep coming up against barriers. Should we be looking at these barriers? Now, I would say here, just go to the next slide. It was lovely to see that short movie there about Costa Rica. And I suppose one thing we do have in common is I actually live and our college is in a small town on the west of Ireland on the Atlantic Ocean. So we probably share the Atlantic Ocean anyway, even in that long stretch of water between us. So I thought, are we oceans apart? What do we have in common? You're involved in English language teaching, probably at all levels. It's Costa Rica, although I'm pleasantly surprised to see there are people from lots of other countries at this event as well. Whereas my emphasis has been on education technology, mostly in higher education, and in Ireland, which is probably quite a different country. To be honest with you, I'll have to admit, I'm not that familiar with Costa Rica, so I don't know to what extent you have similarities or differences from us. So I thought maybe I can use this presentation to learn as well. Because as I say, my interest recently is in exploring the barriers. And what I can do is I can tell you about I want to tell you about the innovations I've tried and failed and succeeded, and the barriers that I've come up against. And I'd like to learn about the barriers that you're come up against so that I can compare them and see what's common to all of us and maybe what's different in different circumstances. Okay, so firstly, let's try maybe a little bit of interactivity. I always think it's interesting to look at people's motivations for innovating. To be honest with you, certainly it's a flaw in my case. I just like innovating. And that's not necessarily a good thing. because certainly my colleagues would think I'm just looking to change for the sake of change. I get bored with what I'm doing. I want to change. That's not a good enough motivation. To me, I often look at the motivations for innovating and learning technology are to improve the quality of the learning experience, to reduce the cost of learning for people, or to improve access to people who can't actually get to education. Those are the headings. I'm sure there are lots of subheadings to these, and I'd be interested in what ideas you have. Now, I've got a little word cloud sort of survey on menti.com. Wait till I get the code for you. I'm going to have to change my screen here if I can find it. No, it's not that one, and it's been locked at the moment. So there's the code there. If you go to menti.com and put in the code 76403661, and you might enter in some of the reasons that you might like to innovate. Okay? What are the things? Now, to be honest with you, I'm going to ask you in a few minutes. It's a different question. So, what do you think are the innovations in language learning that you might find interesting? This is really more to do with your motivation for innovation. I suppose in a way it's what's wrong with what we do now that we'd like to change? I suppose it's not, and it's not necessarily just technology. It's more than technology. In fact, probably if we were to really look at it, probably there are a lot of issues or challenges in education that technology is not the solutions. But let's keep it broad anyway. Okay, well, the fun one is not the good one. That's the one I said I like. I find it fun innovating, and I mean, it's good that we find it fun to innovate. That's a motivation. But it's probably not. If you go for funding for an organization or look to your boss for money and they say, why do you want to do it? And that's because it's fun to do it. That's not good. It's our duty as an educator, yes, to grow. And that sounds like a personal thing, but I suppose from an organization and system, we need to develop. Curiosity, again, that's another one that I really relate to that. Progress, yeah. Oh God, they're flying around there. I don't know if you can see them moving as quick as I can. For better communication, to changing the world, our students need these techniques. Okay. To ease the learning process. That was one of my major motivations. One of the first big successes I'm going to talk about in a moment was multiple choice quizzes. I had so many students, so many assignments to correct. And being an engineer, I thought, how can I automate this? So I got into quizzes for that. Now, I'm afraid it's a big group here. We're not going to get into these in much detail. So hopefully you can see them yourself and see the ideas that are coming through there, and see what ones that you relate to yourself. Motivate the students. I find it motivates me, but certainly I would hope that we can find innovations that motivate the students. Okay, and happiness. Happiness is one that's true to my heart. I got fascinated with that about 10 or 15 years ago. I was doing a lot of reading and research into the science of happiness, and finding a passion and moving forward it, either in your work or, again, that's a personal motivation as well. Okay, let's go back to that was very interesting, and thanks very much for those contributions. I hope I can capture them later and distribute them, and let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so those are some of the reasons to motivate people to innovate. So I was thinking here about, and I noticed when I went onto the website, it was full of light bulbs afterwards. Everybody talks about Edison and the innovator, and it's mostly perspiration rather than inspiration, and an awful lot of innovations don't work. So what I thought I would do, and I thought might be useful and maybe interesting, I hope interesting, is to go back over sort of the innovations that I remember doing. And I do remember the idea that lots of them failed, but when I went actually to pick them out I did find more what I'd consider successes than failures. I think maybe I'm blanking out the innovations that failed, and I have it's selective memory, and I don't remember the ones that failed because I sort of feel that I was always coming up against barriers and trying this and forgetting it. There's a cartoon I came across about a week or 10 days ago. I thought, oh, that'll really do for this presentation because, and I find this difficult, by the way, during COVID, that I have ideas, and generally I'd come up with ideas and I would go to coffee with colleagues and I'd throw out an idea and they would immediately tell me why it won't work. And that's good. That stops that ideas in its tracks and doesn't waste time. So ideas, there are lots of ideas. Getting good ones can be difficult. So some of the innovations I've tried, and this is just sort of a historical perspective, almost of my own career. Forgive me, I'm going to, I hope you'll indulge me in this, but I think there might be some useful things in this. I'll go through it quickly. Back in 19, when I started teaching, it was in 84 and 85, I started to develop self-paced learning for students. I felt that students couldn't all go at the same pace. I used to actually write out notes, handwrite them, photocopy them, give them to students. I was teaching things like programming and spreadsheets to students, and I would let them work through it at their own pace. And I felt that that worked fairly well. I was fascinated the idea that you could write computer programs to teach people. I got my hands on this language called Pilot. We used to work it on Commodore 64s, but the amount of work that you would have had to do anything meaningful for students was huge. So I abandoned that. To be honest with you, I'm glad I abandoned it because what often happens in computing is that tools that are difficult to use, but you sort of see theoretical potential in, what happens is easier tools come later. In fact, an example was, in terms of online education in the mid-90s, I did a course in HTML. And I remember the days where word processors were full of codes. And then they got better. They got to be WYSIWYG. And I said, when I was writing HTML to write web pages, I said, I'll come back later when the tools are better, and then I'll start creating web pages. And indeed, that happened. And indeed, this Pilot language, while it was interesting at the time, better tools did come along later. In fact, this was one of them in the 90s. These authoring systems from Macromedia and things like that came along, which made it much easier than using a computer programming language to write program teaching materials. But again, I felt that they were expensive and they still required a huge amount of effort, and it would have cost me a huge amount of hours. They were used to say something like 100 hours to develop 1 hour of teaching content for students. So unless you were in the business of it, that wasn't going to work for me as a teacher. That was a fail as well. 94, maybe 95, I can't quite remember, I discovered computerized objective tests from a company called Question Designer. That was hugely successful for me. It allowed me to give tests to my students every single week. I would have them in a computer lab anyway. So it allowed me to monitor their progress much better and much more efficiently, and even do my end-of-year exams. My end-of-year exams became a combination of computerized multiple choice tests to measure lower order learning outcomes, and a practical test to see could they actually use the software. Are they packages, the spreadsheets, word processors, things that they were being taught to use. By the way, you teachers might be interested in the idea that in the 80s, this was early 80s, 84, 85, all I had were Commodore 64s. The nicest language for programming on it was the Logo programming language, the children's programming language, and these were engineering students. So I used that programming language to teach them the principles of programs, and it was a lovely experience. I never enjoyed teaching programs so much as teaching in the Logo language for children. 95, we started getting the web, and I started moving all the self-learning materials to the web, which did make them more flexible and more easily accessible, and I could update them better. I began to realize that probably a lot of people needed help doing this. And as I was probably an early adopter, I said to the president of our college, would you allow me to work just full time on helping other staff to use technology, helping my colleagues? Now, he partially granted me my wish and gave me half my time off my teaching and said, spend the other half time teaching or helping colleagues. And that was a complete failure. My colleagues really weren't interested in using technology for teaching. I mean, it wasn't 100% failure, but it was 95% failure as well. And in 2000, I asked to be taken off that. I wasn't making progress. So I jumped before I was pushed. In 2001, during that time in the late 90s, I was realizing that there was a lot of tools out here. There was quizzes here, web pages to help students here. You know, people could submit their assignments by email. You were beginning to see things that there was a lot of different things that could be used to help students. There was email distribution lists where people could have discussions. But I felt that we needed a platform to hold it all together, particularly for the teachers and lecturers. It was just too difficult for them to juggle all those different things. And indeed, then the idea of the learning management system, for example, Moodle, was one of them that emerged at the time. They were emerging, and I suppose I was one of the first to adopt. In fact, what I did is I got a lecturer in another college who was interested to give me a Moodle page on their system, and we allowed my students access to it. Then we got one for ourselves, and then I started getting other lecturers to use it. That was a huge success. And despite all the bad things that people say about learning management systems, they do make our life easier. And I noticed somebody said easy is one of the motivations for innovating. Sure, they're a walled garden, as they say, but they're a good, if you want to do something exciting, you can jump off this into other exciting areas. It's an extremely useful tool. In 2002, I started distance learning with 5 students using asynchronous discussion. I had done a course with the UK Open University, and it was by asynchronous discussion. And it was about teaching and that sort of thing. So it was very much open to discussion. It was useful. But the course we started was in manufacturing management and quality assurance. And there was a lot of statistics and some technology involved in it. It really wasn't suitable for asynchronous discussion. That was quite a failure. But lucky for us, low cost live, basically what we're doing now, which is PC-based video conferencing, that emerged around, the cheap, reliable versions emerged around 2003. There had been some before that. They were very flaky. Microsoft Link, some people might remember that. It was a terrible piece of software. So Skype was coming available. The one that I forget what one we adopted it. I think it eventually became Blackboard Collaborate. But we adopted one. It worked quite well. We were able to share a screen. We had these big electronic whiteboards, so the lecturer teaching maths could write on the board, and it was broadcast. And then we moved to what was called Macromedia Breeze, or Adobe Connect as it's known now. That was very easy to use, and very little trouble on the user end, the student end. It was a huge success. Now, it was a huge success for a couple of reasons, and these reasons are important. It was very easy for the lecturer to use and easy for the students to access. That was very important in terms of success of an innovation. And you might consider this a negative, and to some extent I would consider it as a negative too. It allowed lecturers who are already using tools like PowerPoint to move their teaching to a distance learning mode with very little change. So I used to say, it allows you to move to online teaching, warts and all. So if you were teaching bad in the campus, this allowed you to teach bad online. Now, which is not necessarily a good thing, but remember those 3 circles I gave you at the start? It was solving an access problem, which was a serious problem, access. So I would say, if we can take the same teaching we're doing on campus and make it available to more people, that was a worthy objective and worth doing. And that's what we did. Now, I have to say, it did marginally improve the teaching of lectures, because suddenly they were teaching the same content to adults that are much more critical, adults in the workplace that knew stuff and could, ask very interesting questions. They were being recorded. That was a huge benefit, by the way. And I think they all upped their game immediately once they started teaching online. So that was a big success. And to some extent, I've been riding on that success for a long time now. It's been such a huge success. That particular action of live online teaching gradually made us the biggest distance learning provider in Ireland. 2006, we're doing some courses in automation, and because I came from an engineering background myself, I knew that factories were moving to the idea that you could remotely control equipment from across the plant or even from outside the plant. So I knew that we could do this online as well and allow students to access equipment. That was a great success as well. We gave students access to hardware from off campus. 2012 was the big MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses. To be honest with you, I was very much inspired by Salman Khan and his low-cost, simple approach to putting mathematics on YouTube. And I thought we can do this cheaper and easier. So we built our own MOOC in Lean Sigma quality, and it was quite a success as well. In 2016, I really wanted to develop that further and develop the idea that you could develop these open online courses very cheaply. They used to say that edX and Coursera, it used to cost them about $50,000 to create a course. I thought I could create one of those much cheaper. And I worked with some people across Europe, and we developed a methodology for doing it much cheaper. Now, that is... To some extent, that has some people have taken up those ideas, but to a large extent, it hasn't been as successful as I thought it would be. To be honest with you, I thought if it was going to fail, it would have failed by now. But in actual fact, since COVID, we have a course up on the internet on this, and we're getting far more interest since COVID. So I think that methodology may prove to be a success yet. Since 2018, I've been working on the idea that, well, if distance learning is becoming easy, do kids need to go to college at all? Certainly one of the biggest problems with college is, well, for starters, is the expense. It's expensive to teach in the mode. Also, students need to move to a city where the college is, the university is. They can't really work while they're doing it. So sort of inspired by the apprenticeship system and online learning, I developed a work-based degree in engineering where students leave secondary school. They're giving a 3-day job, 3 days every week for the full year in the workplace, and they spend 2 days studying online. I believe that will build better engineers, and it will be cheaper for the students and open up education to far more young people than we already have. Now, this is where today's talk comes in. I'm coming up against barriers in this. Employers don't know what to make of it, and I'll talk a bit about that later. So it's sort of gaining an interest, and we're going to build some more work-based degrees, but I certainly haven't proven the concept yet. At the moment, we've got funding for a number of projects that I think will be, enabled by technology. One of them is project-based degrees. I mean, I believe that kids are better off to go into the workforce and learn rather than go to college. Most people don't agree with me on that, by the way. But if they do insist on coming to the college, I would prefer that they're doing authentic learning on projects, because a novel lot of learning that they would get sitting in a classroom, watching somebody teaching physics or teaching management could be done by watching videos, and that they should do that learning on their own, and we'll heavily monitor them, and they do projects all day long. So those project-based degrees I'm working on developing. I also believe students can do better in self-study. We just need to train them to do it. And we need self-study materials for that. I think students should be able to get lots of small courses. Learners, particularly adult learners, should be able to. So micro-credentials is very interesting. And the other area, and I'm wondering, is this of interest in language learning, is the idea that students can assess each other and evaluate each other's performance. The research seems to indicate that they're quite good at it if the tools are done properly. I'm worried about lowering the cost of education, and I think assessment is a big part of the workload for teachers and lecturers. If we can do some peer assessment, Peer assessment not only reduces the workload for the teacher, but also gives the potential for the students to learn once they're assessing their peers. So that's sort of a history of the innovations I've been involved in. Obviously, there's not too many fails there, so I've obviously forgotten a lot, but those are the big ones that stick in my mind. So now let's go back to Mentimeter, and what I'd like to know is, what are the innovations that interest you in technology or other innovations? Now, I think I have to go to this and click to the next slide and go ahead and let me know what innovations you're interested in. Now, I'm conscious that in my early days, I was a teacher, I was a lecturer, and I was looking for micro innovations that would help me in my work, improve the things for students. Then I moved on to helping other lecturers. Now I'm more involved. I sort of feel that I'm more involved now in innovations that would change the models of education, change business models or pedagogic models rather than things. So to some extent, my perspective has changed. Whereas I feel a lot of you might actually be teachers, as opposed to some of you may be managing teachers or managing schools. This is interesting. They're coming in now. Virtual learning. Virtual learning, I feel, can be a vague term, but I presume it means learning through the internet. AI, yes, definitely games. Actually, I forgot about that one. MOOCs, yes, free word building. I'm not sure what that is. Gamification, there's games again. Speaking activities. AI has done really well in speech recognition. I wonder, do you feel that some of the things they can do, like auto translation and everything, that are undermining language learning? For instance, context related, the use of OneNote, technology and artificial. They're flying around here. Can't keep up with them. Speaking models, activities, collaborative tools. Yeah, I love the collaborative tools. Been a big user of Google Docs and sharing docs and getting people to contribute. Okay. Self-investigation. I have to say, I wouldn't know exactly what you mean by that. Nearpod, I presume that's a tool. Video games. I'm just thinking. Sometimes back in the, would it be late 90s, near about 2000. My children, I let them go online and go on the internet and go on the Disney site and things like that. And I feel that they had to learn to read because they had to be interpret what's on the screen. So to some extent, gaming may provide great options. That's very interesting. Games right there, games and gamification, online games right there in the middle. Okay, and then AI, materials, getting access to materials. I don't know if you're familiar with open education resources. I think maybe I have some of these. I might come back to that later. I think I better go on with the presentation. I feel that I'm getting too chatty here. It's past 3:30. I better be getting on. In fact, I think I have gone way over my time. So I'm going to have to fly through these. Okay, some innovations I admire, and I'm going to fly through them now because to some extent I want to go to a breakout room and give you some chances to do this. Free online resources, people did mention about content, and the CAD Academy has been an inspiration. The learning management system, MOOCs, again, particularly the Georgia Tech MSc in Computing, $7,000 for an American master's degree. That's fantastic. Flipped learning, where students look at materials before coming to class, maybe do a quiz or something, and then come to class, and then you give them exercises. Peer assessment, I mentioned that. Spaced practice, which I think is something that might be very much of interest. I think Duolingo uses spaced practice. I certainly use it if I'm trying to learn a tune on the piano or something, go in at certain gaps. It helps my memory better. Online exams, objective tests, AI, Duolingo, I think, uses that. Lowering costs, anybody that's lowering costs, University of the People, Southern New Hampshire, Arizona State University is doing brilliant work, really. And one of the best things they do in Arizona State is They basically accept everyone to college. They're not selective, and that drove them down in the rankings initially. But what they do is they work with students that don't meet objective entry requirements and bring them. They're a fantastic university. Project-based degree in Charles Sturt University in Australia in civil engineering. Work-based degrees, what they're doing in the UK in higher apprenticeships. They're probably doing these things elsewhere. MOOC consortium in Europe, where they're recognizing each other's short credentials. And micro-credentials in general, I like the idea that people will be able to get these small credentials that make them more unemployable. And digital representations of these, like badges or digital certificates, that allow employers to verify them and interrogate them as well, find out really what they're about. Okay, I'm going to fly through this because I think we need to get out into our... Actually, we have an hour and a half. I'm getting mixed up. We can take a little bit of time. Okay, but let's go through them, because to some extent what I want to do here is maybe prompt you to think about the barriers that you come across. These are extremely unstructured. It's like a brain dump. Okay, I've just taken, I thought, what are the barriers that I encounter, and start writing and adding new ideas. And they're not structured as well as they should be. But what I want to do here is I want to make you think about the barriers. You know, you think about this, is this a barrier I face? No. Has he mentioned barriers that I face? No. You know, you'd be looking out for the barriers that you think you face. And we'll try and collect ideas on what barriers you do face. So I actually find communicating new ideas as a barrier, whether I'm trying to persuade my boss to invest or to give me money for something, or where I'm trying to persuade colleagues that a certain innovation is worthwhile. I have limited communication abilities, limited abilities to persuade. I think that people are a bit afraid of failure, and that can be personal, okay, or it can be the organizational. It doesn't want to fail on something as well. As I say, persuading colleagues. Now, I've broken this down into a bit of reasons why I think I often fail to persuade colleagues. Time is an obvious one. They're all very busy, and they say, "Oh, it sounds like a great idea. I just don't have the time." I recently tried to get some innovations on peer assessment. I got about 6 colleagues to say, "Yeah, I'd like to try that out," and only two of them had the time to do it. Skills, the skills they have, they feel they don't have the skills, or it takes too much time to get the skills. Tenure, there's no pressure on them. My colleagues they're all permanent positions, government positions, and if they don't want to change, there's no way you can force them. You have to persuade them to change. Hubris is an interesting one. I am always amazed by how, and I don't know if you see this in teachers as well, when you're spending all day long being the expert in the room teaching people about certain topics. I could have an expert in soil mechanics teaching students, and the next thing he's an expert in psychology and teaching techniques, and he knows best how to teach. I suspect teachers gain a certain confidence in certain things that they probably shouldn't have confidence in, or not as open-minded as they can be. Representative groups that actually actively oppose change, probably through a certain underconfidence that they'll be taken advantage of. Our academic committees can be difficult to get innovations through. Our trade unions can oppose. Our management can be risk averse, or they can just, our management tends to have a very heavy workload and doesn't have the time really to consider a lot of innovation. Professional training and professional background, I find influences people a lot. And I think you have to watch out for this. There's probably some technophiles here, and I've met a lot of teachers actually who absolutely love technology, and they're able to do amazing things with technology, and they come to me with ideas, and I say, yeah, that's great, but I would never be able to convince your colleague over here to use that, because it's far too technical. It would work for you, but it wouldn't work for somebody else. And techies do come up with these shiny new ideas that don't really work well for ordinary people. In higher education, we have a lot of people who are doing educational research, and they're generally interested in leading edge stuff. So a particular technique or technology that has been well, proven or is simple, like just teaching live online, they wouldn't really be interested in and prefer more advanced ones. Again, a lot of the things they would propose wouldn't necessarily be suitable for your regular teacher or lecturer. Instructional designers often take a very detailed approach to design. It'll often come from multimedia backgrounds, and whereas teaching, just the task for a regular teacher that you can do quickly, probably wouldn't suit their approach. Quality assurance people will make you subscribe to the highest standards of quality once you start working on learning technology, despite the fact that we know that we have to just do what we can. People from an audiovisual or media background or TV background love high production. They would be really disappointed if you produce something like the Khan Academy. I feel that the Khan Academy proved, I don't know if any of you are familiar with, say, open universities like the UK Open University that was started in the 1970s or 1960s, would produce sophisticated TV programs. Very good and for very large audiences. When we hit the noughties, those organizations, including the Open University, really kept in that same high production value model. Whereas we know that internet sort of innovators, the sort of influencers, things we're doing really quick and dirty YouTube videos, they're just very quick. And that really allowed them to move a lot faster. And the UK Open University, by subscribing to very high quality production, and this would be distance educators at the end as well, really lost a lot of ground, and the number of students, I suppose they lost a huge amount of students to organizations like ours that were jumping to the next innovation and sort of leapfrogging over theirs. Quality assurance, I think I mentioned that already and talked about that. We can set ourselves very high standards of quality in certainly in online distance education that we wouldn't actually make ourselves subscribe to in regular classroom teaching. Funding, I probably should have put that at the first. That can be a barrier because we can't get it. If technology is implemented poorly, that can hold people back from doing it. High expectations, to some extent, that's really linked to the quality assurance as well. Politics can, I'm an engineer, technologist. I'd like to think I have a good appreciation of what the regular teacher, lecturer needs to do so that my interest in technology at least makes me relate to them and come up with good solutions with them. But there can be lots of reasons behind the scenes by why people will resist innovation. And sometimes they say, I can't understand why they're resisting it. And I presume the politics involved also, either at organizational level or even at national level. And protectionism, you can have systems there that are becoming outdated, maybe an apprenticeship system, and maybe it's not appropriate for new thing, and that people will protect the systems they're in and oppose it. National regulations and funding are an interesting one here, because we tend to have national regulations that are very deterministic and specific about what actions will lead to good outcomes. So they say, in order to have a good course, you need to do this, this, and this. You have to do this, this, and this. And when you start innovating, you start to realize, well, we can get the same outcomes by not doing that and by doing this, doing something different. But the regulations won't allow you to do it. So regulations often have to be changed in order to allow you to innovate. There are also funding and subsidies. Often subsidies, for good reasons, can say, we will subsidize courses if they're done a certain way. And then when you come up with an innovative way, you find this won't get the subsidies that the other ones. And even it might be cheaper, but it doesn't work out cheaper to the end user because of the funding regulations. Expectations, somebody mentioned this earlier, I think. One of the things interesting recently, a lecturer said to me, oh, I did this, and with the students, and I put up recordings for them, and I did this, that, and the other. And they said, oh, yeah, I think it might have even been on peer assessment. And they said, it's not our job to assess each other, it's your job. So students have certain expectations of the way teaching should be done, and they can be actually resist innovation. Parents expect courses to be run a certain way for their kids to go to a college or something like that. And if you come up with a different way, maybe they won't accept it. Employers expect courses to be done a certain way, and they will put a question mark over other types of qualifications. So they can be inhibitors. Professional associations, if you want to get accreditation as a national teachers organization or something like that, will they restrict how the education can go? Access to technology, that's an inhibitor. Ideology, even, but it particularly comes out in public, private. You know, if should we be outsourcing to some private institutions to do certain tasks? Should private institutions be involved? You can get a lot of ideology that actually makes people resist change, even though the outcomes may be better for the learners. So they're the sort of ones. That's a sort of a quick look at all the inhibitors or barriers that I have found. And now, what I'd like us to do now is to go to, let's see how much time we have. Right, we've about 3/4 of an hour left. And I've set, and with large numbers like this, I'm always a little bit wary of interactivity and what can happen. So we'll see how this goes. We're going to go to breakout rooms now. Okay. And in hopefully the group size will be about somewhere between 6 and 10. I hope we can manage that, Mark.
Breakout room. We'll be able to manage that, Brian. No problem.
Yeah, something between that. I wouldn't like if it were greater than 10. I'd prefer if it was around 6, 6 to 8. And what I want you to do is you can introduce yourselves to each other, and the smaller the group, the less time that will take. Okay. But what I want you to do is you to discuss. Don't set it up yet, Mark. I have a few minutes I want to talk to people about. I want you to discuss between yourself what you believe the barriers are. They could be the same barriers that I've maybe outlined. Now, that's a lot of barriers. So what I'd probably be looking for is you to come up with 3 or 4 major barriers in your group. Okay? And what I want you to do is we're going to go to a little tool called Padlet. You see it down there in the bottom? There's a link that you can type in if you want, or I think we will post the link in the chat area. Now, we could have 50 different people posting. You can appoint one of your group to post up what the barriers you found of, but we could have a lot of people posting at the one time. So what I want you to do first is, why don't I just show it to you? Let's see if I can show it to you. I'll come back to this in a minute. And it looks a bit like that, okay? That's what you'll go to. Now, what I've done is I've put up some of my barriers there, because what I want you to do is when you agree what the barriers are in your group, I want you to go here and check, are they up there, okay? And then what I want you to do is if they are up there, I want you to rate them, give them a score, okay? How important is that barrier, or how serious is that barrier, okay? If your barrier that you've identified isn't up there, you can press the plus button here and add a new barrier in. Okay, now I'll be having a look at that. If I see 2 that are very identical, I might merge them into one. We don't want this to get too messy. But what I'm aiming to do here is to collect your ideas and reach some sort of a consensus on what the barriers are that you face innovating. Now, we'll finish off as well. If you stay in the rooms, we'll maybe take about 25 minutes. If you stay in the rooms, you might think about then, take 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes then to have, if you have any solutions. Now, that's tough. I put one up here just for you because you probably all give this 5 stars. Increase the funding, okay? So, but there might be other solutions as well to these barriers that you identify. I see somebody's up there already. Now, I would prefer if you go to the breakout rooms, have a discussion on the barriers, agree 3 or 4 of them, and then come back, see if they're there, add them if they're not, and then start rating. You can all as come back and start rating, but just nominate one person to put up the barriers that you've identified. So, and you can, as I say, you can scroll across to the solutions then. Good luck. I think I have the facility to pop around some of the breakout rooms and just listen in and get your opinions. So fingers crossed the technology works here, guys.
Sure.
I'll just go back to that. Okay. Are we ready to go, Mark? Can we?
Yeah, yes, Jonathan, whenever you're ready, you can open the breakout rooms for us.
Okay, people, breakout rooms are open, so please do join your partners so you can start your discussion. Go ahead.
Okay, what are the barriers? Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All good?
Yes, sir.
To some extent, what I was worried about in the Padlet has happened. It's really busy. It's really busy. It's not complete chaos yet, but it is quite busy and there's a lot going on there. And I think it's a little bit beyond me to sort it out completely. What I have been doing is been going into it and I've been looking at the ones that are rated 5-star and pulling them to the top because I sort of felt, wouldn't it be useful if we could identify the issues that are most important to you. But if I were to look at my screen here, I'm going to share my screen here if I can. Now, you might have the Padlet open yourself as well. Something here like standardization was put up and somebody rated it 5-star, but it's only one person has rated it 5-star. So I'm not sure if standardization is really a big problem or a barrier or not, because it's only been rated by one person. So what I'd like you to do as we just look at these and maybe take some questions is continue to go in there and look around at the barriers and give them between 1 if you think it's a poor idea or if it's wrong, give it 1 star. If you really agree with it, give it 5 stars. And we'll see if these ratings change. The fact that even some of these have 6 or 7 ratings means that not a lot of you have done ratings yet. So let's concentrate on rating what's up there rather than adding what's new. By the way, you can scroll down. There's a lot of them coming up down there. And please do scroll down because the people who've added to the bottom now will be ignored if you don't scroll down. There might be some great ideas down there and we want to get down to them. Now, there's one I wasn't expecting. Parents excuse their children for bad behaviors. So get down, just scroll down. So our job now for the next few minutes is to do some rating, okay, on the barriers. Add in some solutions. I've half an idea that we really aren't going to get to tackle solutions today. But to be honest with you, if we identify some of the biggest barriers that you feel you face, I think that is something worth achieving today. Okay, so let's see here. I probably should. Administrative and academic authorities do not make it easy for teachers to innovate. Would that be sort of rules and regulations, the sort of constraints that we're under? See what other people, there's a lot of people have identified that. 8 people have identified that as being significant. Support from colleagues. PLNs, I'm not quite sure what you mean by PLN. Personal learning networks, is that it? Yeah. Certainly I found that useful. Certainly if you're on the leading edge or more towards the front in innovating in your organization, you're probably not going to get a lot of support from your colleagues. But to be honest with you, my challenge has been pulling people along, getting colleagues to support other colleagues. So that's an interesting one. And that's about 16 people have rated that as important. Let's see what's up top here. Teachers' busy schedule. I certainly expected that. It's very hard to innovate when you're very busy already. And to be honest with you, I've often talked sort of theoretically with colleagues, which would say, what percentage of an institution's effort should be in encouraging change? What percentage of your personal effort should be in trying to change? Rather, I mean, you have your day job to do. So how much of it, and because my job is innovation, I'm going around annoying teachers and managers about changing. And I feel a bit guilty about it because I know they only have so much time to do it. So it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure how would we get the answer for it. Where's the optimal point in trying to change? Because sometimes you've got some good innovations that you've done recently, and it might be better just to bed them down and not be doing other ones. There's poor technology implementation and accessibility. That's interesting. That one is done. Student expectations. Students have a fixed idea what the teachers should do. I didn't expect that one, by the way. A colleague brought it up with me. I thought the students would be very keen that we innovate, but sometimes they like things being done the way it was before. National regulations, funding mechanisms. Sounds like we do have more in common than I expected. Access to technology, QA systems, you don't see those. I come across that, by the way. So I just want to go down here. Vested interests, groups that like it the way it is already and don't want to change that, and that's not proven to be very popular. And parents' expectations, lack of support from parents. I'll bring it up a little bit to here. Yeah, I'm not. To be honest with you, I don't expect support from parents. I just don't expect resistance from parents. Maybe that's because I'm at higher education, and the lower you go down in the levels, you need more support from parents. I suppose if you're flipped classroom for secondary school teachers, you might expect them to do things at home, but I imagine access is the problem there. They can use easily outside the classroom. Would it be fair to say that mobile phones are really much more the tool that's in use outside schools than inside schools, rather than laptops or Chromebooks or something like that? Now, I'm fascinated by this, and 5 people have rated this. Parents excuse their children for bad behaviors. I'm going to have to pull it up because it's scored 3.5. Fear of failure is proving to be rating high. Digital tools, how to actually use the digital tools properly and fully. Is this about training, digital tools? Difference in perspectives. Now, I'm not fully sure what's meant here. 2 people have rated it, but I'll pull it up there because they feel very strongly about it. Okay. High expectations, internet access. Is this under a different one? Sorry, I forgot to turn off my Teams call coming in there. Okay. I'm beginning to think we have them explored pretty well now, and I see that there's 9 minutes left. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull the solutions onto my screen here for what they're worth. Well, I think it's probably worth throwing it open to the floor now, Mark.
Sure.
Any questions?
All right, everyone. So if you have questions, we would love to hear from you. You can go ahead and write those in the chat. And if you'd like to open your microphone and say something to Brian directly, you can also indicate it in the chat if you would like to say something.
I see a comment here, not having a proper room for taking the class, and I sort of think that those of us that come from more privileged situations might totally get wrong the challenges of people that have less resources, and here we are trying to use latest technology. That's not to say that the latest technology can't help in difficult situations, but it does put it a little in perspective.
Okay. I think Jose David had his hand up, or at least briefly. I don't see it up anymore. I'm not sure if you wanted to say something, Jose David.
Yes, yes. You know, uh, one of the aspects you really I consider as a barrier, it's the time we have to prepare for classes, and I guess it's teachers all over the world. We have to face this limited time to prepare, and when you invest even more time, you realize that the time is very limited, the way you want to present your activities. So my solution will be that the regular meetings with other colleagues, so we can have the chance to exchange ideas, because we are experimenting different experiences, and sometimes in particular activities we are better than others, and some other colleagues are better than us in other activities. So sharing would enlighten many of us to do things faster and save time.
Yeah, and this is a thing that I said. It's an interesting question. How much of your time can you give to this? You have your day job. I wonder how organizationally or nationally, how can the governments or the education, those responsible for the systems or the management, allow lecture or allow teachers some more time? Is there a way of doing that? Like, if we genuinely wanted innovation, can we put some extra funding in it, and it is to reduce the time on everyday work for individuals so that they can have a little bit of time to innovate? Um, I'm sure it's quite difficult because the way of schools are structured and classes are structured. You know, you can't split up necessarily a class between people, or if it's a secondary school and you're teaching a subject and you're going around to different classes. I don't know if that's the way it's generally done. That's the way it was done here. Maybe you can reduce slightly for a term the number of classes that teachers, just to give them that little bit of extra space to innovate. I know that when I was teaching back in developing distance learning in the noughties, I actually created the time by neglecting my students. I don't know if this is a terrible thing to admit, but I did neglect them a bit. I didn't put as much time into correcting assignments as they probably deserved. And I think I used to say, your sacrifice, future students will thank you for your sacrifice. It was very arrogant of me to say it, I think, but I did really want to innovate, and maybe I was being selfish. But I think it's, if you genuinely care about the students you have now, time is a huge challenge.
Well, Brian, I'm seeing a comment and a question from two different people that are kind of related. So Fabiola Lopez said, I feel resistance from teachers to innovate among her colleagues, especially those who are immigrants. I'm assuming she's saying digital immigrants, this idea of kind of people who are not raised around technology. And then Haoji mentioned this question here, and I have to scroll to find it. She said, you know, what's the most important factor motivating you to keep innovating? What should we do to encourage our colleagues and other teachers who resist these innovations that we would like to implement?
Yeah, the resistance of colleagues to innovate, that has been my challenge since 1997 to some extent.
Buenos días.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I mean, I explained that in 1997, I actually requested to be put in the position of helping colleagues, and by 2000, I had failed miserably and asked to be removed from it. So I was very conscious about, why did I fail? What do they want? What are their motivations? And now, and it has been a big responsibility of mine since then. And the simplest, I suppose, approach to, I would say, is that there's no point in me bringing them solutions that are complicated, and there's no, also, it's not necessarily good to bring them solutions that will improve the learning experience of the students, but increase their workload massively. That's not going to work either. So in a way, you have to find a win-win for lecturers. I mean, you do have to, or teachers, you have to expect them to put a little bit of extra effort in, but the idea that you bring to them has to pay off for them and pay off relatively quickly, which is a pity because there probably are other ideas that would pay off big time but require huge effort in the short term. So I'm afraid it limits the solutions that I go to lectures with. There's some good ideas, good innovations that I say I would never sell that to anyone. I wouldn't be able to sell it to people. So I try to bring them ideas and say, this will save you work within a year. And hopefully they will work harder during that time. But I suppose it is their motivations. Maybe other teachers just love doing a good job. And if you can persuade them that this will improve the learning for your students so much, that's what motivates them. But I don't feel I've given a good answer to that, but maybe I've thrown out some of the ideas that might be useful in working with colleagues and convincing colleagues to change. And I suppose it's understanding the particular colleague you're dealing with and what motivates them. I mean, I do think the institutions need to think about how can we give these staff time to innovate.
So we're almost out of time, but Carolina Verde has had her hand up for quite a while. So perhaps, Carolina, if you are brief with your question or comment.
That is only a comment. Sometimes online lessons allows me to innovate in gamifications in the classroom, not only to teach, but also for assess. The background is that some principals, even parents, thinks that the students are not learning English playing games.
And that seems to be the issue of expectations that, as I say, I gave an example of a particular teacher that was doing something, I think it might have been peer assessment. And the same could be said if you bring students into class. We've used a system called Alex from McGraw-Hill for mathematics teaching. And it's basically we took the students into class. We had a trolley with a lot of Chromebooks. And we put the Chromebooks, the students took out the Chromebooks and they started doing the maths. And the teacher was there just supervising them. And you could argue that parents will say, you're not teaching our students. You know, they have a certain expectations. I think this is what you're referring to. Maybe I've got it wrong there. But I don't think we can do much about that. We just have to press on with those objections. Those objections don't stop us from doing it, but we may get criticized, and we have to be prepared to take that criticism, hoping that we will prove those people wrong in the end.
All right, so it's right at 9:30 our time. So we want to say thank you so much, Brian. It really has been an enlightening presentation. I know people got a lot out of that activity, especially in the breakout rooms with the Padlet. So I've been seeing quite a few comments there in the chat about that. So thank you so much on behalf of the organizing committee for our National Conference for Teachers of English. We want to just express our gratitude to you. And so let's give Brian a nice warm virtual applause. If you have your microphones open, or not microphones here, cameras. Let's see some movement so he sees, you know, that you
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. As I say, we never really got to the solutions. Maybe that's always the way, you know, but I put them up there.
Becoming aware of the barriers and more conscious of them is, I think, probably the first step, and then seeking solutions. So we really appreciate that. And guys, we're basically out of time here, but we've been posting here in the chat a couple of links. These are links to our survey and to join our community.